Bob, as you know, we do a little series called Behind Closed Doors where we talk to interesting people, LPs, investors, smart folks, about things we've heard them say or particular skills they seem to have. And what I'd love to talk to you today and get a couple of your thoughts on this is one of the gifts that we think you have, and we've seen it deployed for probably 12, 13 years, is the ability to deliver strong medicine, hard medicine, difficult things to people in a way that not only do they not resist it, they embrace it and end up acting on it. Whereas many of us, when we deliver that kind of medicine, the wall goes up. And people kind of go, I don't need to hear this from you. So I'd love to hear, has this always been something you've had? If not, where did it come from? Can you talk just a little bit about, and maybe it's just who Bob Gold is?
Sure. Well, thank you, Andy, for asking. I think in order to do that well, you have to come to it with a certain conviction about why it's so necessary and the importance of it. And, like you, I've actually changed my perspective over time just about what is the role of an advisor or a board or a CEO. And, you may remember when we were growing up professionally, the CEO was like win at every cost, at all costs. And today that role, and again, when I say CEO, it could be a team leader, someone with responsibility for other people, have a lot more constituencies to worry about and a lot more issues like diversity, inclusion, sustainability, all those kinds of things. And so in order to do it, it's become a much harder job, but it doesn't really change the primary purpose of a team leader CEO, which ultimately is success. The mission is to be successful. And again, even if the company's mission includes things like a better environment or a more inclusive workplace, it's all in service of, really a strong outcome. And I once worked for a guy who used to say, no margin, no mission, meaning if we're not successful, our mission is hopeless. So what does that mean as far as how you deliver medicine effectively, and what underlies it, and what kind of conviction do you need to have it? And of course, it goes from something very lofty, from something very nuts and bolts of how do you make the business run better? And that requires you at all time to assess, train, monitor, evaluate, and critique someone. And when there is substantial underperformance, substantial lack of commitment, substantial ineffectiveness, I don't want to say you need to be brutally honest because it implies there's some kind of brutality in it, but you need to be generously honest, which is let the person know in a way that they have no uncertainty about as to where you are coming from. And I don't think that's that difficult to do. And I never think it's inappropriate to do. And for the most part, I think you're doing that person a favor when you do it, because I have found that most organizations are really reluctant to fire someone or to terminate the relationship for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's expensive. Often there's severance, there's new searches, there's an admission you did a bad job when you either hired or recruited or promoted the person. It's disruptive. You don't have someone in that role. So it's pretty easy for somebody to keep their job and for the most part to perform within certain parameters. So what happens when you finally, when you reach the conclusion that that person is either incapable, unwilling, or frankly just doesn't have the talent, the expertise? Like if I was recruited to be the starting guard for the New York Knicks, eventually the coach would tell me, you're no longer the starting guard of the New York Knicks. I don't care how hard you're working. And so, again, I get back to generous honesty. Obviously you meet with the person, You take them through all the ways you think they could have done better, the opportunities they've had to improve, why you think they are not meeting, very clear objectives of the company, and you tell them, as directly as possible without being pedantic or arrogant or lauding your higher level over them, that they're underperforming, they're not meeting expectations. If it's already too late, they're fired. And if it's not too late, what specifically they need to do to meet them, to meet your expectations. You make sure that there's a clear understanding of what they are, and you move forward in a way that is, this work is bad. This is how it could have been better. This execution was not what we expected. This product did not come on time, at the level we expected. I always say the most important thing for a business to do is to tell customers, tell whatever their constituencies are, that, your delivery date is this, and it's going to look like that. And then you outperform on both. And when someone underperforms both, you just make it really explicit. You assign blame if necessary, because I'm a huge believer in single points of accountability, and making sure within your organization, the person who is accountable understands when that person's the single point. And if they fail, they're gone, or they're replaced, or they're demoted, or they're on notice, and you just do it really explicitly.
I want to pick up on a couple of things. First, I love the idea of generous honesty, because we've always talked about how the biggest gift you can give people is honesty. And it's a lot harder to find than you think. The second thing I'd like to focus on is not in the cases where you're terminating somebody, but the second example you gave where you're trying to correct behavior. And there's something about the way I've seen you do that, and I've been the recipient of that, the fortunate recipient, that somehow makes it not personal. Because the minute emotion gets into this stuff, nothing good happens. Can you talk about, how you do that? And I'm just curious, has it always been Bob Gold? Was there a period where you were pounding your fist and throwing things and shouting, or have you always been kind of even keeled for that?
Andy, I have this general belief that what I'm telling that person, they already know. Like, a person who's intelligent, who you've hired or you've worked with, who's a colleague, knows when they either didn't put forth, a great effort, or met deadlines, or, did a particularly good job. So I just say, hey, this work is not any good, and and I know it. And I'm not sure why it's not, I can surmise, but we both are, really aware that what we expected to have here is not what we have. Meaning, your presentation just was dull, or, the product lacked the things we needed, or, your effort were a little less than I expected it would be, and things we've talked about. And just don't make it personal. Make it about just a general level of disappointment and lack of either execution, or effective execution, or effort. And don't say you fell down on the job here, which people will take, or you didn't commit, but just say, in my view, and then fill in the blank. And you understood what my view was, and I know it could have been done better. And I don't know. I don't know why you think what I do is, less personal or less, demeaning than if someone said to, a person, boy, that was just really awful. Although I probably have said that to people, but I try not to personalize it. Keep in mind one thing, that it's not as if you're a doctor delivering to a person and his family a diagnosis of a terminal disease, right? Mm-hmm. But if you've ever been the recipient of a doctor who knows how to do that, you know how it's done well. Mm-hmm. what you're telling them is that the work is lousy, that, what you contribute is way less than we expected. And often you're giving them an opportunity to get well. And assuming, or sometimes you're giving them an opportunity to find to find a career that's better for them. But the devastation of the news is not so great. And for the most part, I think you're helping that person. Because like I said, you don't want to be having that conversation. You feel it's an obligation, as a manager or owner or CEO to have that conversation. As long as you keep it at that level, I don't think the person ought to take it personally. And if they do, there's not much else you can do about it.
You just said something really interesting. It almost felt like you were saying, listen, the work is less than we expected from you.
Right.
Which in an ironic way is sort of personalizing it, but in a positive way. Backhandedly kind of saying, from someone like you, we're expecting a lot. One final, crack at this. If you walked into a room filled with people who are going to leave and then have to deliver some hard medicine, not fire people necessarily, but try and correct them, and you had 30 seconds to give them a word of advice or 2 words, what would you say to them?
So I'm in a room with a group of people, all of whom I have to give some negative
No,
feedback.
no. They're going to leave the room.
Oh,
These are all managers who are about to go deliver
oh,
some hard medicine. And the master of delivering that is going to walk in and go, guys, here's a few tips before you leave to do this.
okay. I would say, yeah, I might begin at the beginning, which is, what were the expectations when we started? What was our plan? What was our deadline? What was our deliverable? Get pretty specific and say, if you look at all 4 of those types of measures, we have failed. You have failed. We expected this and we got this. You committed to do X and I got 0.5X. The members of the team I know, harbor great reservations about your ability to perform at this level. And I would be fairly specific about, the measurements that I was, that I had, and the, failure to live up to them. And sometimes you just have to say the work here was subpar. It's not the kind of work that was expected of you. I had one, CEO would say to me, everything we do here comes in a Tiffany box when we send it out of the door, is, sort of a metaphor for super high quality. And it is when it comes in the mail and you see that Tiffany box and it's gonna be something that's beautifully wrapped in a beautiful thing. And you gave me something way less than that. And you failed the organization, and we're not going to succeed with this kind of work. So it needs to be improved. And if it's not improved, the consequences are we're going to replace you. So again, it seems so obvious to me. I don't know if I'm being helpful here.
You're being very helpful. I get that feeling of talking about the work relative to the expectation of someone like you, which
but it also is going to depend on your relationship with that person. How many times have you spoken about it with them? How closely were you a part of it? How frequently has the product or the work, the service been critiqued along the way? I really do believe when you're at the point where you kind of just feel like you have to lower the hammer or whatever you lower, the person knows it's coming, and you're doing them a disservice to be less than candid, explicit, and impactful on it. And if it is the wrong job for the person, getting them to realize it sooner in their career is a real favor that you're doing them. Being told it's time to find something else to do can be the biggest gift you'll ever give someone. You just have to believe in it.
Yeah, I know a guy who ended up being really successful when he decided law was not for him.
That's right. And was told that by people. No, you're making a good point because I was a lawyer for 2 years, and most of the senior partners who I knew who liked me, they knew I was underperforming, and they were, of course, correct. And 35 years of private equity later, it was great advice.
Well, that's a perfect way to end it. Bob, thank you so much for the wisdom and guidance. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy.